Hello, everyone. It's Cait here at A-List Education. We'll just give it a few more minutes to have a couple of attendees hop on, and we'll go ahead and get started. Raining so bad here in Florida right now. Do we have anyone else on the webinar here from Florida tonight? You can let us know in the chat.
And for those of you in the Seth, you're very far from Florida. For those of you who are just coming into the room, and I'll mention this again later, but most of our communication with you all is going to be done through the chat function on the right side. So
yeah,
it's raining in Virginia too, I guess.
God, rainy Thursday. Sorry, it's Thursday. All right, we'll go ahead and get started and let the rest of our attendees kind of trickle in here. But so first, I want to thank everyone for coming to tonight's parent webinar on SAT, ACT Test Day Essentials. So here at A-List Education, we are the ones going to be providing you with your content and information tonight. A-List Education, we view ourselves as market leaders around educational services. So we specialize in everything from test preparation, college advising, tutoring students. So we wanted to bring some of our knowledge and some of our research here to you all tonight. So first, I just want to say a big thank you to all of our parents who showed up tonight. That's a note of a thank you from us here at A-List, but also a thank you from your students. They might not say it yet, but what it tells us that you guys came tonight is that you guys care. You all care about what's best about for your students, and that you have the right timelines for test taking kind of top of mind. So that's great. We just want to make sure that you have all the right support and resources during that testing process. So let's go ahead and kind of do some introductions. So who we have here with us tonight. So I'll start. My name is Cait Crockett. I am the Senior Director of Student Success with A-List Education. I've been working in the education technology field for almost 5 years. So a little bit of background about me. I actually joined a company called Testive back in 2018. So Testive is a little startup company that put together this adaptive learning software that helps students prep for the SAT and ACT. Since then, I've grown in my career. Testive was acquired by A-List Education, and now I help in specializing students across the board, from test prep, program advising, recommendations around academic tutoring, and I will also be answering all the questions in chat. So like Scott said in the beginning, we want to make sure that you use that chat function. So don't be afraid to get in there. We'll get those questions answered for you as we go through. As our speaker tonight, we also have Scott Zuzel. He's also from A-List Education. Scott is a college admissions advisor, instructor, and curriculum developer. He has about 15 years of experience in SAT and ACT, as well as loads of graduate admissions tests like LSAT, GMAT, GRE. So he's worked with students all across the board. I do have an ask of you all here tonight. So we want to make the most out of everyone's time here. And the best way we can do that is to personalize this webinar to what you guys need to know. So help us help you by using that chat box over there. Ask a ton of questions. They can be related to a more general ask or personal to your students' needs, but we want to make sure that we're covering all the information that you have in order to feel, like I mentioned earlier, well supported throughout this SAT and ACT navigation. So without further ado, I want to pass it on to Scott. But before, if you guys could just, some of you already have, let us know where you're located. We love to hear where all of our parents are from. So let's go ahead and throw some chats in there. Let us know where you all are hanging out from. So Scott, I'll pass it over to you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we got people from Oregon to South Carolina. So it looks like we got everybody covered. Kansas, wow. I'm all over. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you again. I just reiterate what Cait said. Thank you for being here. It's been a really weird year, more than a year for a lot of people. And so, with all the changes that are occurring in everyone's lives, The people that have really been hit the hardest, I think, in a lot of cases are young people and students specifically, because of all the changes that have occurred in testing. It's hard to keep up with everything. Things are different from place to place. We're going to get into all that stuff. We're going to talk about the SAT and the ACT and compare the two. So we're going to get into a lot of different things. But again, just congratulations for coming here, because it shows that you care a lot about keeping up with this stuff, and it still matters. So first of all, here's the agenda. Let me go over this real quick so you guys know what we're covering. First thing we're going to cover is just what I talked about. It's been a really crazy 18 months, and it's had an effect on schools and the way that they interpret SAT, ACT scores, and the number of students who are testing, and the way that people are applying. So we're going to get into some of that stuff. We're going to talk about why the SAT and ACT still matter at this point. Go into timelines for testing and how to prepare. Talk about the SAT and the ACT and do a comparison of the two. And we're going to talk about your role in the test prep process and what that looks like, and reaching your peak score. So, and then we'll do a little Q&A at the end. So that's the agenda. Before we get into all this content, though, let me go ahead and put a poll up. The Rolling Stone just released a new list of 500 songs, at the top 500. There's a new number one. So in the spirit of that list, I'm going to put up this poll. It's a really simple poll. Just Beatles or Stones. I just want to know if you prefer the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. If some of you are into jazz, I'm sorry, there's no Coltrane on here. There's no there's no house music. You're just going to have to go Beatles or Stones for today. Interesting. That's what I expected, honestly. I mean, Cait, who do you prefer, the Beatles or the Stones?
Beatles. You see lots of Beatles love out there.
Me too. Stones are great, but I also prefer the Beatles. All right. Thank you very much, guys, for humoring me. That's how the poll function works. It's really cool to see kind of what people's responses are. So I'm gonna give you guys another poll here in a few minutes, but before then, let's go ahead and dive into some content. Okay. So testing in the COVID era, things are changing, and things have changed. But it may not have a giant effect on what your actual plan is or how you should approach getting into the school of your choice. So let's talk about this a little bit. Because of the pandemic, directly because of it, the SAT and ACTs canceled many exam dates from March through June of 2020. It was impossible to get students into a room together, and the SAT and ACT weren't immediately ready to convert to like all digital testing and have students take the test at home. A big part of the way that they do business is getting students together at schools and using schools as the forums for test taking, and so they weren't prepared to do testing in a pandemic era. So it pushed a lot of the test dates back, and as a result, a lot of students pushed their test dates back or applied later. And when schools started to realize people weren't applying as early, they needed to do something. And what they did was they said, you know what, for this year, at least, we're going to do test optional. There are some schools that went test blind, but most went test optional. So the difference between those two things real quick, test optional means that you do not have to submit a score with an application. Test blind means that even if you submit a score, no one sees it anyway. Like it literally never gets seen by anyone at the admissions council. So as far as like what the permanent policies are going to be, it's still kind of up in the air. I mean, many colleges kind of insinuated that this was going to be a short-term thing, and that they long-term they were going to eventually go back to requiring testing. But it's also fair to say that there's no way we're going to go back to the level of requirement across the board that there was before this. There are going to be some schools that stay off the ACT bandwagon and aren't going to want to accept scores anymore. An example of that, the California school system, so University of California and all its affiliates, they have gone completely test blind. Actually, they removed the SAT, ACT completely. Their plan is over the next 3 years to remain test blind, but in the long term, they're planning on creating their own tests, and it's supposed to be released by 2025. I mean, whether that's actually going to happen or not, who knows? But that's what their plans are. So there's some interesting numbers to look at. If you look down at the fourth bullet, 43% of applicants reported a test score in this application season. 43%. That's not a big number. And it's actually shockingly low considering the year before that, it was 77% in the 2019-2020 cycle. In 2018, 2019, it was 73%. I mean, those numbers in the 70s are about what we'd expect. And so to have a season where 43% of applicants are including a test score in their applications is pretty shocking. There are a number of different reasons for that. It's not always the case that students hadn't tested. It just means that in certain situations, if their test wasn't going to look good on their application, they weren't going to submit their score with their application. And so that makes sense. Why would anyone if it's not required? So changes in institutional policies definitely influenced this trend. But the other thing is like students were pushed so far back in the schedule. Another huge difference is that when they were actually reporting their scores. Much later in the season than is normally the case. So there's some background on what happened in the COVID era. Now I'm gonna say a couple things before I move on to the next slide. Like, why is the SAT and ACT still taken? Do I still need to take it at all? These kinds of things are common questions. So let me just say that at the top level schools, the most competitive schools nationally, the most of the students who got into those schools did so with the aid of an SAT or ACT score. So just because something was test optional doesn't mean that the test didn't make an impact for students who got in. And so you've got to bear that in mind. And honestly, for most students, it's still in their best interest to try to maximize an SAT or ACT score. Whether or not you end up including it in every single admissions packet you send out, that's a different story. But it's absolutely in your best interest to, at the very least, effort the top level score you possibly can get. All right, moving on. So why the ACT and SAT still matter? I dug into that a little bit, but let me go over these bullets. One, we talked about this a second ago. Test optional is not test blind. There are some test blind schools, but all the ones that are test optional, they're sort of a better way to say it is test recommended instead of test optional, because most of the admission people working on admissions councils will tell you that they actually would prefer to see a score as opposed to not seeing one. It's just that it's just not a requirement. Other thing is that the top schools continue to be heavily influenced by the test, and that conversations with people at these schools bear that out, and the statistics do as well. And here's some other things I think are actually more important. A GPA becomes harder and harder to move over time. Like, you can influence your GPA wildly if you're a freshman. I mean, you've only had a semester in school. As you matriculate through high school and you work your way to the upper grade levels, it gets progressively harder because there's just way more data to overcome. And so by the time you're a junior, it's pretty hard to move the needle on your GPA very much. And by the time you're a senior, it's like really, really tough. So, I mean, what can you do to sort of, change the overall appearance of your application? And, the big thing is get an amazing score. If you post an amazing score, it's going to make an impact. And you have that entirely within your grasp all the way through the very last date in the testing cycle. You still have the ability to improve your score a great deal and make an impact on the admissions councils that might be looking at your application. So that's the huge thing. A high test score can overcome weaker elements of an app. And so, when you're applying to a school, there are extracurriculars that come into play. There is the essay that you have to write. There's your GPA, which is the biggest part of it. But again, that's really tough to change late in the game. And so if some of those things are kind of static and it's going to be tough to change that, like your GPA might be a little bit low for a school that you want to get into. If you can post a test score that's a little bit high, so maybe you have a 25th percentile GPA, post a 75th percentile test score, and all of a sudden you have a much better chance of getting into that school. So great way late in the game to overcome weaker elements of your application. And the last thing, SAT and ACT are still of considerable importance to many admissions councils. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And so if you're trying to open up as many different avenues as possible and trying to keep your options open, taking the test is still important. Do you like taking tests, Cait? Are you good? Standardized test taker? Oh, you can save it. Sorry. We'll wait. So how important is each piece of your application? Well, this is according to NACAC, which is a association of advisors, and they put out all kinds of surveys all the time. And they're really, really helpful to kind of understand what admissions departments are doing. However, they didn't release one in 2020. And they also didn't release one yet this year, and I don't think they're going to. And there's obvious reasons for that, just because there's such crazy years, and there's such absolutely disparate ways that admissions departments are actually reviewing applications. So it's really tough to come up with any sort of consistency when it comes to a poll like this. But going back to 2019, this is definitely the case, and we can have to sort of infer that it's more or less still the same. So grades is still number one for undergrad applications. Grades is definitely number one. You can see how many people, what percentage anyway, kind of rank that as of considerable importance. The next one is grades in college prep classes. So college level grades still mean a great deal. The strength of your curriculum absolutely is taken into account. Not all schools are the same. Some schools are also on 5.0 scales and some are on 4.0 scales. And so there's all kinds of things going on into evaluation of a person's curriculum and how strong it is. But the admissions departments absolutely do know sort of how rigorous your academics were at your high school. And then number 4 is admissions test scores. And the interesting thing here is if you add up both of those bars, it's actually still it's really significant. Considerable importance is, of course, lower than the top 3, but moderate importance is pretty high. And so, a great deal, well over 70% of admissions officers are saying that it's either of considerable or moderate importance for sure. And so it's a very important thing to most people on admissions councils. And then filling out the rest of it, we don't have to go over it in detail, but the other stuff is your essay, recommendation letters, your demonstrated interests, and your extracurriculars, all that kind of stuff that goes into your full student profile. All right. So which test do you take? Do you take the SAT or do you take the ACT? Great question. To be honest, there was a period of time not so long ago when it actually mattered a little bit which one you took. There were certain schools that preferred one over the other. The ACT in the beginning was largely regional. It was kind of a Midwestern test, and people on the coast took the SAT. But anymore, it just doesn't even matter. It's not the case at all. So, so which one should you pick? I mean, I don't know. Which one do you like better? There's not much of a difference between the tests anymore. There used to be more of a difference than there is now, and I'm going to kind of go over some of those things. But basically, if you're getting better at the SAT, you're also getting better at the ACT. The biggest differences are sort of just structural and the way the test feels. All colleges now accept both the ACT and the SAT. I mean, and they treat them equally. There is no reason at all to pick one test over the other in terms of the schools are going to prefer one or the other. It's just not the case. And there is no advantage in any college for either test. So my point is that you can't go wrong with either one if you want to get a really good test score. So what's the difference between them? People always ask. I mean, like I said, the SAT recently changed. Back in the old days when I took the test, it was a 1600. And then for a while, I went to a 2400, which made me feel, I was like, I couldn't even get a 24. You didn't even let me get an 1800. I didn't even get a chance. But then they switched it back to 1600. So now it's back like the old days. So the SAT especially has undergone numerous changes. And it's honestly, over time, it's become more like the ACT. So look at the timing. The SAT is 3 hours without the essay. The ACT is 2 hours and 55 minutes. So it's 5 minutes apart, not a huge difference. So if you want to save yourself 5 minutes, you can take the ACT, and that's the one you can choose, I guess. With the essay, it's pretty close as well. 3 hours, almost 4 hours for the SAT, and the ACT is about 3.5. So the essays are optional for students, and some schools prefer them or would like you to submit one. So you just kind of got to do the research and find out if the schools you're applying to want a writing sample. A lot of students who take the test multiple times, they'll take the writing sample once or do the essay once, and then the rest of the time they'll just do they opt out. So here's a look at the sections. The SAT has a reading section, and then a writing and language, a math no calculator section, and then a math with a calculator section, and then the optional essay at the end. ACT, also 4 sections: English, math, reading, and science. And then they don't call it an essay, but it is an essay. the optional writing section of the ACT. So there's at a glance what the structure of the two tests looks like. All right, so the similarities, like I said, they're both standardized tests. They both consist of 4 multiple choice sections designed to assess student proficiency, both in high school academic content and college readiness, which is essentially like problem solving skills and those kinds of things. So it's a combination of those two.
Scott for just a minute. We'll give him a chance to connect here again to his Wi-Fi. Cait. While he's jumping back in, I had asked a question in the poll to see how many of you are currently registered to take an SAT or ACT. I'd love to hear in your chat, when are your students planning on taking an SAT and ACT if they are registered? We're about to talk a little bit about timelines and when a student should start prepping and when they should test. So this will help us to direct that webinar accordingly. So if you guys don't mind just taking a minute while Scott gets back on and tell us when you're planning on taking those exams. Awesome, Lauren. April. Is your student a junior? Great. Awesome. Looks like we got some freshmen and sophomores in here taking the PSAT. Nice. Okay. All right, great. So I'll go ahead and kind of start picking up where Scott left off. But so I know he was talking about the similarities of the SAT and the ACT. So, oh, right here he is. He's back. He's back with us. There he is.
So I'm sure a lot of you are used to dealing with that kind of stuff with the increase in webinars and video conferencing. So apologize for that.
I feel like I should cue like "Here Comes the Sun" because you came back on. It's like, you know, appropriate to the Beatles. So.
Oh, that's very sweet. Well, anyways, we were talking about the similarities between the tests. Sorry about that, guys. And like I said, they're both basically on their surface exactly the same. SAT writing is basically the same as ACT English, believe it or not. They're both passage-based tests on the standard conventions of English. They basically are testing a student on grammar, punctuation, syntax, and also writing organization. And so, you know, they name them different things, but they're essentially the same in terms of content. SAT reading is the same as ACT reading. So that's good, at least. That makes sense. You have passage-based tests on reading comprehension. They ask you about main ideas. What are the details that you can pull from a passage? What inferences can you make from the content in the passage? They ask a little bit about style and transitions and in author's point of view. All those things are, you know, sort of standard elements of any sort of reading comprehension testing. So the length, complexity, and timing differ slightly. The ACT actually gives you slightly less time per question. So it's a little bit tougher grind on the ACT to get through the questions, but they're pretty close. Differences: SAT math and ACT math. So they're both math. That's true. ACT math has slightly more geometry. SAT de-emphasized geometry with the last update, and there's slightly more data analysis. But the big thing is that the SAT math has a no calculator section. And so if you're the kind of person who is just like, you know, completely dedicated to your calculator and like, you know, that your teacher asks like, what's 7 + 3? And you're like, I'm just going to punch this into the calculator real quick just make sure. If you're that kind of student, then maybe the ACT is for you because you have the calculator all the way through.
Scott again. So while he's jumping back in, I also would just like to know one more question in the chat. If you guys are currently registered, I notice we have some juniors and seniors. So parents, this is your cue to answer. So is this your student's first attempt at taking the exam, their second, their third? So let us know about how many attempts your student has taken it, if they've taken it before. Great. Tons of first attempts. Okay. Great. You guys are the perfect parents for this call. Oh, we got Scott back. There he is.
Cannot explain it. Those are
We can still
great.
hear you, Scott.
I can't with this.
Yeah. So if you just want to
Really?
go ahead and keep talking, we can keep.
Okay, that's good. Great. All right. Well, yeah. If something goes wrong, we'll deal with it. There's no calculator section in the math portion. The other huge thing is the AC Science and the SAT. What?
No.
Am I gone again?
Valerie made a
sorry.
funny comment in the chat. She said, "Scott, we're going to get you 2 cans and a string."
Oh yeah, no, thank you, Valerie. I appreciate that. That was really
That was great.
Honestly, it'd be an improvement. I'm ready for it. The ACT Science and the SAT what? The SAT test doesn't have a science section, but it kind of does. There's still some of that same content. The important thing to know about the ACT Science section is that it really isn't testing you on your science knowledge at all. It's testing you on your ability to process science information, if that makes any sense. And so the SAT actually has this content in various forms in other parts of the test. The reading section of the SAT has a science passage in it, for example, and there's some of that data analysis and synthesis exists in the math section. So pretty similar tests. They just move some content around a little bit, but again, the tests are really, really close together. So what does that mean for you? Well, you should start with one test to the other and stick with it. And the reason for that is you just want to be as comfortable with the test that you're taking as you possibly can be. Which means that you're familiar with the test, you're familiar with the timing and all that kind of stuff. That's the important stuff. The concepts may be the same. Most of the content is the same. But you want to start with one test and stick with it so it's familiar to you. If you're really early in the process, you can take a practice SAT and ACT and get a feeling for your preference. That's not a bad idea. But still, whenever you pick a test, just stick with it. I mean, if you're studying for the SAT, you are getting better at the ACT, whether you know it or not. So if you have a significant issue with one of the tests at a certain point in time, and you want to switch midstream, again, you can do it and it's fine. It's not like you're starting from scratch if you switch from one test to the other. It's just that in general, it's best if you are a specialist. And so pick a test, pick your favorite one, and just work as hard as you can to maximize your score.
We'll cover a lot of it. That's why I saved it. I knew Scott was going to kind of tap into this, but if you have any additional questions after he walks through what it's like taking multiple tests, we'll cover them at the end for sure, because this is a really important piece. So thank you for asking that question. Yeah.
So thanks, Cait. A lot of people ask whether or not they should take multiple tests. And in the grad world, if you're going into law school or you're taking the GMAT for business school, it's a bad idea. You don't want to take multiple tests because the schools will see every single score and they could be swayed by a lower score. And so, in those cases, you really want to make the first time you take it the time that you are the most prepared and just take it once and be done with it. But high school and getting ready to get into undergrad programs is completely different. The SAT and the ACT have some quirks that mean that you should definitely take multiple tests. Should you take the test multiple times? Yes, you should. Why? Because you get to choose which scores to send to colleges. They don't. So you actually direct your scores out, and you direct the scores that you want to direct out to each school. So there's no reason at all not to take multiple tests for that reason alone. The best score is still what matters. The schools are just looking for your max score. What's the very best score that you have? Low scores don't hurt you. So don't worry about a low score. If you post it, you don't even have to send it out. And the last one, and this one is big. I'm sure you've heard a little bit about this. At some schools, the super score is what matters. The super score is a combination of your highest section scores from different tests. And so, obviously, for most people, if they take the test multiple times, they may have a great reading section one day and have a great math section another day. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to combine those two sections into a single score? Well, with schools that accept super scores, you can do that. So these are reasons that you should definitely take the test more than once. But here's the most important one. Data actually shows that there's a heavy correlation between students who test multiple times and those who see the highest score increases in overall scores. So that means that you should allow yourself time to take the test 3 times at minimum. Some students take the test more times than that, and that's perfectly fine. You can take the test as many times as you need to, really. But 3 is a good number. 5 is a good number. The data, I know, like statistics can be interpreted in different ways, and there are probably different reasons for the fact that students who take the test multiple times also have higher score increases. They're usually more likely to be studying a lot. They're also, more likely to have started preparing earlier. And so, it's not exactly a randomly sampled group, but it is interesting to note that there's such a heavy correlation between students who take the test multiple times, 3 or more, and the score increases they see while they're studying, and also their overall scores. So let's talk a little bit about preparation and the testing timeline. When do you start to study? I mean, this is a tricky question because everyone's lives are a little bit different. Can you cram for one of these tests in a month? Yeah, you can. It's not the best idea, and you're unlikely to hit your max score if you do that, but you can do it. It's just, first of all, it's not very mentally healthy. It's a lot easier to start as early as you can, and take a lot of the pressure off yourself. If you start early, you're leaving yourself room for mistakes, leaving yourself room to get sick sometimes. And it also, the biggest thing, it takes pressure off of you. You don't see that test looming on the horizon like some specter that you're really, really concerned about. And the time keeps ticking away and you're nervous, and it just leads to more test anxiety that you don't need. So start early and start studying often if you can. We'll talk about that in a second. But as far as the timeline goes, the ideal time to begin studying is right around April of your, in between, I guess, your sophomore and junior years. The summer, essentially, between your sophomore and junior years is the best time to really start to study. By your junior year in the fall, you want to begin sitting for tests. A lot of students push that back from these last few cycles just because of everything going on with the testing and COVID and everything. But still, ideally, you would like to start testing then in the fall of your junior year. You can continue testing all the way into the spring of your junior year and even over the summer before your senior year starts. Really, even all the way through the September and October for sure of your senior year, you can still test. Your junior year. You can still test. App deadlines are your senior year of fall at the end of the year, generally when the app deadlines start. So your last chance is that fall semester of your senior year to actually test and get some late scores in. But you want to be, at that point, you want to have everything ready to go. And there's a lot of other parts of your application you need to get ready. So ideally, you would have a test score in that you're happy with much before that, and you can kind of relax and then focus on the rest of your application.
Great. So I'm gonna steal the platform from you here, Scott, for a minute. So Scott actually talked a lot about the advantages of prepping effectively and efficiently. Not only is it mentally healthy for your student, but it also helps with building confidence around taking these tests. So it's a great segue into talking about prepping options and solutions. So it's funny, Scott actually asked about my test taking experience. So quick story time. I don't know about you all, but I remember my test taking experience and prepping times. And throughout the years, I've learned I really don't maximize my retention by reading from a book and just, reading it over and over again. It's not my personal learning, the best way for me to learn. So, I would come home after spending 4 hours with every Saturday with an SAT tutor, and my mom would ask me, "So, what did you learn today?" And I would always give her the most, teenage angst answer, "I don't know," and just move on with my life, and just do another Saturday leading up to that test. But that type of tutoring didn't work for me. It might work for some students. I know it works for some students, but it didn't work for me. I found that it still gave me a lot of anxiety. I couldn't actually pinpoint exactly what that anxiety was about. Was it about the actual test experience of sitting down taking a test for 4 hours? Or was it that I didn't understand the content, that I didn't understand approaches? So whatever it was, I couldn't put my finger on it. And I learned over the years, I think I probably could have done a better job of going into that test had I had maybe a coach or a tutor that understood my learning style or had better insight or data to be able to look at to help me personally through my test prep experience. So I know I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, I worked for a company called Testive that has now been acquired by A-List Education. And the reason why I brought that up now is it is the solution to so many families' questions around how to prep for the SAT and ECT. So Testive is an adaptive learning software. So what that means is it actually calibrates to each student's skill level. So like Scott talked about, and like we have outlined here, the best method of prepping is we want to think about consistency and not cramming. Scott mentioned the thought of studying for a month before such a loaded test. It gives me anxiety even thinking about it. That was years ago. That was in high school. But what Testive does and what our platform allows is that we ask students to commit small doses of attention on very targeted test prep. So we're looking at asking a student to commit about 30 minutes a day, about 4 to 6 days a week. And this is a very personalized platform for your students. So how it works is we will ask your student to take a baseline exam with us. Once that's completed, we upload those results into our software program, and it essentially generates a score report. You receive that immediately. And again, we're looking at data. So from a parent perspective, from a student perspective, most importantly, from your coaches and tutors perspective, this is the most valuable piece of information they can have access to. What this score report is going to tell that coach and parent and student is it's going to outline exactly the subject areas that they're having problems with. Was it actually a testing strategy? Was it time management? Were questions answered or were they omitted? So these are all things that a coach is going to be able to look at initially before that student even starts prepping to guide their prep program that works best for that student. So we want to think about what that student will have access to. So when we say we want a student to commit about 30 minutes a day of prep, I think that's an ideal scenario, right? We have that students. Yeah.
So Cait, I was just on that exact point, like, the commitment of 30 minutes a day. I just want to interject something. So this is, speaking of like learning science, they've done a lot of studies about retention of information lately. And it's actually pretty startling how little you learn if you're studying for extended periods of time. The time where your retention is the best is the first 15 minutes and the last 10 minutes or so of like a class that's like 45 minutes long. And so there's this big chunk in the middle that where it's really, really difficult for you to make any sort of progress, or at least in a way that's meaningful and sustained. You end up losing that stuff the next day. And so it's just interesting that it's that short. I would have expected it. I mean, I used to do long marathon sessions of studying. I didn't realize I was just wasting a lot of my time.
Yes,
Did you ever study for an entire night on a right before a test?
But yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's actually just so, and any study session, even if it's 30 minutes and you want to do another 30-minute session on the same day, it's still even way better to go have lunch or like split them up.
And when we say 30 minutes, we don't
really
mean just, hey, I'm going to open my book and read questions for 30 minutes. What our platform gives those students access to are very targeted, specific questions that the adaptive learning software pulled based on where that student stands. So it's constantly going to be evolving and changing as the students go through and answer these questions. 30 minutes a day is anywhere from 8 to 12 practice questions. So during that time, the students are actually able to, they're able to actually see where their struggles are, where those pain points are. Is it strategy related? Is it content related? They will also have access to 3,000 or more practice questions that are specific to that student skill level. And they're also going to be working with a coach who's going to be able to look and extract this data on a daily basis to be able to constantly redirecting their prep patterns so that the student's able to retain that information, and then they can introduce more challenging material. So it's a constantly evolving and changing platform that makes the most out of that 30 minutes that we have for that student's attention. They can carry and go on with the rest of their lives, right? We're looking at extracurriculars. We're looking at heavy academics. We're living in a era of coming off of the worst, hardest year for these students. So there are so many factors that are all, a student is kind of managing. So as a parent, let us, let the platform navigate and help support your student, especially, in this time where everyone's moving to a more virtual and digital world. So having that ongoing guidance, having that ongoing feedback, support, and data is going to be so important for that student's prep pattern. So how is your student going to actually improve using a platform like Testive? So the platform itself actually includes tons of video explanations. It has notes sections where the students can actually interact directly with their coach. By being able to provide that instant feedback on that question, the student's really able to digest what kind of problems they maybe had with that question. And then also, when they're back on with their coach for weekly coaching sessions, the coach is able to make the most of their prep sessions by targeting specific areas that student highlighted during their prep course. So this also, not only allows them to digest and grow and be able to kind of evolve in their prep, but also the confidence. So this goes back to my story about all the anxiety that was built around this test for me. And I didn't have a lot of these factors that these students have today. So what can we do to build confidence around that test? What can we do to make them feel better about it? Again, we're just circling back to thinking about the efficiencies and the effectiveness of maximizing the prep time. So a really important element in test prep for any student is support at home, support at school. And like I mentioned in my story, there was so much that my parents didn't know throughout my testing experience. All they knew was that they were paying for a tutor for me to learn from and hopefully do well on these tests, right? But what they had no idea was what I was actually struggling with from a content and testing strategy perspective. So Testive, and why I love this, and this added value is just amazing. It provides parents with insights that normal day-to-day tutoring doesn't. So it's funny, I talk to parents all day, and I talk to parents of all sorts. Some who like to push their students, some who are very removed because they have independent students. All sorts of parents. But the common denominator in all these conversations I have with these parents is that they want to make sure that they're doing the best that they can to provide the resources for their students to reach their students' goals. Whether that be a community college, whether that be an Ivy League, whether that be anywhere in between. That parent is on the phone with me for a reason. And it's because they want to make sure that they're giving their students all the opportunities that they can, and in the most not only cost-effective way, but in the best way that can help their student absorb this information. So Testive in itself allows parents to have access to a parent dashboard. So the parents are so involved in how they're prepping and can kind of choose how they want to express that to their student. So for example, you'll be able to see all the coaching notes from each session. So the coach will go in there and say, Scott was struggling here today. We covered this. We'll be moving forward in math tomorrow. It allows you as parents to open up communication avenues with your students that you might not have otherwise. Sitting at the dinner table asking questions like, hey, I know you met with Coach Will today. I know you focused on algebra. How do you feel like you did today? And that is just such a way of removing so much anxiety from so many different types of students just by having conversations like that. Having that family involved as much as they can and having the conversations about it just make these tests feel so much more comfortable. So I think having that type of insight and data is really great for a parent, and also, of course, for a coach to be able to help with directing their prep, and for the student to understand their progress. So really, when a student actually sits down and takes their SAT or ACT after completing a program like Testive, there should be no surprises as to how that student should score, because we have all the data and everyone is in the know. So let's see. So I know Scott highlighted this a lot as well. It can be challenging for students to get excited about test prep. It's easy for students to feel overwhelmed, frustrated, anxious while they're trying to figure out and navigate through these tests. So reason why we wanted to make sure that we provided you with all of that information that Scott paired with and a solution like Testive is because I know that parents like you all here tonight just want what's best for your students. And through Testive's method of prep, I've talked to families, I've talked to students where I've actually seen those struggling students succeed. I've seen them excel. I've seen them grow in their confidence and apply to their dream schools and get in. So these are the success stories I love to hear. This is why I'm in this industry. I get to help parents like you, help students that were like me feel a lot better around taking these tests. So before we wrap, I want to ask, I know that there's some questions. So Scott, while I kind of just talk real briefly, if you want to pick out some last minute questions that might be flagged, that would be great. But I know we threw a lot of information at you here today. So in the bottom of the left-hand corner, you'll also see a box that, that says schedule a call now. So what we can do here at A-List Education powered by Testive is we're offering a free consultation service where we can get the chance to get to know you and your student's goals and be able to make recommendations around prepping, tutoring, college advising, whatever it is that you need. We've been a trusted resource for many families over the years, and we wanted to expand that reach to you all here. So if you want, you can go ahead and just simply use that schedule now, book a call with us, with Scott or I, and we'll be able to go through and map out your students' plans so that you guys all make sure you feel comfortable and confident rolling into some of these test days, which, I know I saw we have some in the fall, some in the spring, we have some seniors. So book those free complimentary calls with us and let us help. So Scott, one more thing before I pass it over to you. In addition to all of that, as a thank you for coming, we also wanted to provide you with an opportunity to have 50% off of our Testive coaching packages. So if you decide that you want to purchase Testive, you have until Sunday at midnight to come and talk to us, and we'll happily take 50% off of that program for you all, and look forward to hearing some of your success stories from your students. So while you guys are booking calls, Scott, why don't we open the floor to some questions and see if there's anything that we want to answer.
Yeah, let me just type this in real quick and spell it. So I did see a question in there that I want to address. And by the way, guys, feel free to ask as many questions as you want. We have some time left at the end of this, and so we want this to be interactive. And I want to make sure people will get their questions answered. Sabrina asked earlier, "Is there such a thing as taking the test too many times?" Well, no, not really. I will say this though: taking tests doesn't make you better at the test. And so taking tests repeatedly isn't a good strategy for increasing your score. If you haven't done work in between one test and the next to get your score up, if you haven't practiced, then you're going to get the same result over and over again. So that's really the key. There's no such thing as testing too much, but there is such a thing as testing before you're ready or before you made any sort of impact on your score. So that's kind of the one thing to think about. And let's see, Paratosh says, "Do you recommend any SAT or ACT coaching classes?"
Yeah, no, just of course. So I talked a lot about the advantage of a platform like Testive, and the reason why I believe in it and preach it the way I do is because it works. We work with students to make sure that they feel supported, that they have the resources they need to be successful. We want to maximize all of that studying that your student's doing. And the way that we can do that is through prep. and support and coaching. So mapping out proper timelines that align with your students' goals, taking into account goal scores, schools, previous academics, all of these things factor into what program is going to be a good fit for you. So that's why I recommend booking one of our consultation calls with Scott or with myself, and we can be able to help you navigate and figure out which option is going to be the best fit for you. Let's see. Before we wrap up, if anyone has any other questions, you can please feel free to direct those in the chat. I know I have our scheduled now consultation button over on the left side. So please book some calls with us. We are here as a continued resource for you all. For everyone who's signing off, we want to thank you all for coming. Scott and I will be continuing to do these webinars as a series. So you all will be receiving some information after this webinar that includes how to get in touch with us, a recording of tonight's webinar you can share with your family and friends, an invitation to our next month's webinar that we'll be hosting, and of course, just any additional resources that you might need on there to help ensure you feel good going into these tests. So we will leave the chat box open and answer that on there. Both Scott and I will go off camera and go on mute. So if you guys need anything, please direct everything to the chat. Yeah.
There's one more question in the chat that I can address verbally real quick before we just move to chat and start answering questions. But Paretosh asking, what specifically would you study to prepare test booklets or test prep books? And this is a really, really good question. There's no bad way to study. I mean, it's really a matter of efficiency when you study. And studying from books, you can absolutely. I mean, in large part, that's how I learned the stuff that I've learned about the SAT initially. But there's less and less time available for students in general, and so having an efficient result becomes more important. The problem with books is that often you end up having to dig information out or find it, and then when something's really text heavy, especially with mathematical concepts, they're really difficult to describe in text. And so seeing something displayed for you or seeing the parts move around and having a graphic representation of things is incredibly important. And it also helps to have someone build the problem for you. It's a big difference when you're watching like a 30-second video clip on how to solve a specific problem or how to solve a quadratic or something than poring over dense text to try to figure it out. So there is value to books. I mean, you can carry them anywhere. I'm not saying don't study with books. What I am saying is that in order to get an efficient result these days, really most people are sort of using other forms of study. And if you have the ability to take short quizzes that have different questions available, immediately get an explanation for why you missed it or why you didn't, and then also get access to a video that explains how to work through the problem, and you're able to get those things on demand, that makes a big difference. Another quick question from Kate Manier asking about Khan Academy. Khan Academy is a great resource. I would never tell anyone not to use Khan Academy. It is absolutely a great resource. They do not have a lot of video explanations for their questions, though. So you will be poring over dense text if you end up using only Khan Academy. What I would suggest is using Khan Academy. I mean, it is a nonprofit. It is free. You absolutely should use it as as an accessory to your study. It is valuable.
Yeah.
Susan,
why don't you go ahead and email me directly? I am more than happy to schedule a time that works for you. I'm actually on weekends and always available to answer calls. So please email me if you have a time that doesn't fit with what's offered. I'm happy to make time for you. Okay, great. Lori, great question. So awesome. I didn't talk about pricing. So it's really great you brought that up. So Testive is actually operating as a subscription service. So the amazing piece about that is that we personalize the prep plan that works for that specific family, that student, right? So let's say we map out a 2-test timeline. So we say, Lori, we want to have your student take the test first in February, and then we want to have them take it as their second and hopefully final attempt in April, right? So we have our 2-test timeline lined up. We would prep all the way up to that February test. So for month to month, it's currently priced at $399 for our standard coaching program. And, but you all do get 50% off for attending today. So it's billed each month that your student is active in the program. So we would roll in at $399 or we'd want to look at also, depending on what program you side with, but let's say it's $399 a month. You would just pay $399 leading up to that February test. We could then pause the program while you receive those results. So it would take a break. You're not being charged. There's no penalty to charge or to pause. And then when you receive your results, you can make the decision if you want to continue on with Testive, or if you want to go ahead and say, hey, I'm pleased with my first test score. I don't need to take it again. I can get into my dream school. That's our goal. Great. So the great thing about it is you can cancel at any time. We can also extend the program to meet any testing timeline that aligns with your family. So it's completely flexible in that regard. We also have a 2-week trial opportunity. So for those of you who do want to give Testive a try, you can actually enroll in the program, and you have 2 full weeks to give Testive a go. So that's 2 meetings with a coach, 2 full weeks of prep, 2 full weeks of building good habits. And if you decide that for whatever reason Testive is not a good fit for you, you let us know and we refund that money in full. So Testive works when the student wants it to work, right? So we want to make sure that we pair our program with the right students in the same way that you would want to make sure you're picking the right program for your student. So so that's a little bit about that. And I'm, of course, just to note here, I'm always able to set up demos where I could actually do a walkthrough of Testive's platform with anyone here tonight. So you can just let me know when you either book a call or email me directly. Scott, I think
Yeah, I'm back, by the way. I don't know how that happened, but I'm actually fully on video. What's going on? I'm glad to be back. So Ray, that's a great question. And Benat, I will get to your question as well. Ray says, I know you guys talked a little bit about admissions and scores, but can it help also with merit-based scholarships to have better test scores? It depends on the scholarship. All scholarships have sort of unique criteria, but absolutely is the short answer. The most famous and most test dependent of these the scholarships are available is based on the PSAT. That's National Merit Scholarships. And so that's a really big deal. And it opens up a ton of opportunities if you get that scholarship. So yes, the answer is absolutely, it's true. The other thing about just prepping anyways is that for a test like this is not the last high stakes test that the student is going to have to take. You've got a bunch of testing in front of you in college. If you want to go to grad school, you've got standardized tests to get into grad schools too. Like law school is the LSAT, business school is the GMAT, GRE for a bunch of master's degrees programs and PhD programs. So you're going to be doing this for a while. It's a really good opportunity to get confident and comfortable preparing for high stakes testing. Regardless of how you feel about high stakes testing and how necessary it is, it's still in your best interest to, because it's the world we live in. It's still in your best interest to perform as well as you can on these tests, and it opens up a lot of doors for you. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name right. Is it Benoit maybe? But my child is in 9th grade. Should she start early with testing? So 9th grade is young. I don't think it's too early to start practice testing for sure. I think the first time I ever took an SAT, I was in, my mom's a teacher, so she was always doing experiments on me, like giving me an SAT when I was in 7th grade. But I did take it really early. But I'll tell you what that did for me is it gave me a ton of confidence going into high school when I had to see these tests again. And so there really isn't an age that's too early to see practice questions from this material. Also, there is a 9th grade version of the PSAT. And so if you'd also, start prepping for that, even though those are just practice. It's never too early to start preparing for these tests.
Yeah, gaining exposure
never too
to
early is
what the
probably going
test
too far, but ninth grade
looks
certainly
like,
isn't too
how it's
early.
formatted. Again, this just all plays into how your student's going to feel on test day. But to Scott's point, it depends on each individual student. So really looking at a number of those other factors I mentioned earlier. So we schedule these consultation calls before our students enroll in our program, because we want to make sure that not only we fit them for the right program, but also to make sure that their timelines work with making sure a student doesn't feel burned, like they're burning out, or, we do have students who start in ninth grade and are done testing really by their summer of their sophomore year. So so much depends on where that student is in their education. Really the best way to answer that specifically to you and your family would be booking a call with us, and we can kind of evaluate where your student stands and make that recommendation once we know a little bit more.
And on the back of that, I also most of the content that's on these tests is actually not from their 11th grade year or their 10th grade year. It's actually largely from the stuff that students are doing in ninth grade, and so there may be some stuff that's completely unfamiliar to a student, depending on the rigor of their classes and how far advanced they are, if they're taking advanced placement classes or anything like that. But still, there's tons of content that's going to be familiar to them. And to be quite honest, taking the test as early as like 7th grade, like I did, it gave me exposure to concepts that I ended up learning by just practicing the test. And then when I got into high school and ended up seeing those concepts in classes, it felt a lot safer. I didn't feel like I was overwhelmed at any point in time by that content because I'd seen it before. And so, yeah, it's a good way, first of all, to improve your score starting early, but it's also a good way to gain confidence in your academics in general.
Thank you, Scott. So again, as we wrap up, if you guys have any other questions, Scott, if you want to throw your email address in there, and mine as well, so they can have it at the end of the chat for those who would like it. Please book some calls with us. Let us get to know you and your student a little bit better, make recommendations for anything and everything that they need to feel supported during this time. So again, we want to thank you all for coming. We will go ahead and turn off our cameras and go on mute in case you want to jot down our email addresses or book a call. And again, everyone in attendance tonight does qualify for 50% off of our coaching programs if you book a call with us before Sunday. So just let us know. And we again, thank you all for coming tonight.